Howdy folks, and welcome to the, I was going to say annual there because I'm crap, the monthly Salt Mines Q&A here on the Salt Mines Discord channel. This always happens the first weekend of every month unless circumstances conspire to prevent it. So thank you to everybody who turned up and is watching or listening to this live. And if you're watching this as Monday's episode of Mingles with Jingles, welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. Hope you all had a great weekend. So the idea of this Q&A is, well, I mean, the clue's in the name. It's a Q&A. So without any further ado, I'm going to head straight to the Questions for Jingles channel and start answering questions for Jingles. First one of which is courtesy of Basement NATO Jesus. Dear Jingles, you're on the doorstep of the 500th episode of Mingles with Jingles. That's true, actually, yeah. 500 months, wow. Being that it's a special milestone in the industry to reach, how does it feel? Like, did you ever think you'd be this successful as a YouTuber and be able to make a living off it? Absolutely not. I'm sure most of you are aware of the story of how this channel started. It was never supposed to be a proper YouTube channel. It was just a way of me saving World of Tanks replays when the various different third-party World of Tanks hosting sites collapsed under the weight of their own success and couldn't afford the server fees anymore, and all of the replays that I'd uploaded got lost. This was before worldoftanksreplays.com existed, which is sort of officially supported by Wargaming themselves. So I started recording the replays on video and loading them up to YouTube without any commentary. And then people started watching them, and then people started saying you should put commentary on them. So I did. And it was all incredibly amateurish. But it slowly grew and grew and grew, and here we are. So now I had no idea it was going to be this successful, and I didn't even realise at the time it was possible to make a living from it. It's harder to make a living from it now than it used to be, but fortunately I was already fairly well established when things like the apocalypse hit. So yeah, I've been extraordinarily lucky. It's not a, how can I put this? It's not a field I would recommend people try to establish themselves in these days. Pretty much even if you are successful, you have to take sponsorships in order to actually be able to make a living out of it. But yeah, definitely very, very lucky. And I've got a couple of sponsorships. I don't want to turn this into a sponsored video, but I do have some stuff coming up, including some pretty amusing stuff that hopefully I'm going to be able to make some very, very funny product integrations on. But that coming up whenever. For now, yeah, thank you. Great question. Absolutely didn't think it was ever going to be as successful as it is. I mean, you know, I'm not a huge YouTuber, but I'm not a small YouTuber either. I'm kind of, you know, sitting somewhere in the middle at a position where it is possible to actually make a living from it. So yeah, didn't expect that to happen. Very, very grateful that it did. And of course, I've got all of you guys to thank for it. Next question from David L. Hey, almighty Overlord Jingles, did you ever get around to the Expanse-themed space tactics game Nebulous Fleet Command? I didn't know, and I'll explain why in a moment. If not, it's currently 30% off on Steam until tomorrow. Ah, no. To give a taste of the sort of game it is, the latest update added a missile salvo planner so you can more easily launch an attack with missiles with different seeker types and penetration aids to complicate the target missile defense. And if you don't want to deal with all that, you just go with old-fashioned guns and railguns, and that'll work too. I've got so much stuff to play at the moment with more stuff coming up. I just don't have time. I recently started playing, I mean, I've had it installed since launch, Baldur's Gate 3. And I was terrified of actually starting to play it, but I've got so much other stuff to do, and I know that if I started to play Baldur's Gate 3, the next thing I know it's 4 o'clock in the morning and the cats are begging to be fed. And that's pretty much what happened. I started playing Baldur's Gate 3, and I haven't even gotten through all of the stuff that I got through when I played the alpha. Which is like a tiny fraction of the game, but entire days disappeared doing it. So the last thing I need right now is another game to suck me in, because there's just got so much different stuff to do at the moment. Next question from Panzer Oofs. Dear Mighty Overlord, I started watching your videos during the closed beta of World of Warships and soon became a subscriber to your channel, and watching your videos has become a part of my daily routine since then. I found out that you and I share the same taste for games, so I bought a lot of the games I saw you playing and enjoyed them pretty much myself. Like Subnautica, yeah, the original Subnautica was an absolute masterpiece. Shame about the sequel. I mean, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't a patch on the original. So this isn't really a question. Instead, I'd just like to use this opportunity to thank you for hours and hours of top-notch entertainment, hundreds of Jingles moments, many Jingles landings, and so on. All the best to you and all the persons that matter to you. Please keep up this excellent work. Kind regards from Germany. Oh, and I really have to add a question. Are you recording? I certainly hope so. All the lights are on, so I've done my part. Whether or not it's actually made a decent recording, I guess we'll find out when it's too late at the end of the Q&A. Next question comes from Yamatog2. Almighty Overlord Jingles, apologies in advance for the long post, but this question needs some context to better understand. I recently watched the amazing 24-hour D-Day special of World War II in real time by Time Ghost History. Oh yeah, Indy Nidell. I think I did something with him once. There was a World of Warships thing, a victory parade. That's right, yeah, and Indy Nidell was along, doing commentary on certain of the ships. We all had a ship to follow during the victory parade, and we talked about that ship. James Hornfisher was there. Indy Nidell was also one. He was a really nice guy, and his videos are very, very good. Anyway, back to the question. And in this special, they pretty much state that the whole incident with John Steele getting his parachute stuck on the church tower of St. Mary Église behind Utah Beach is almost definitely made. Oh yeah, that's in the movie The Longest Day. Very famous scene. Likely as a publicity stunt for the movie The Longest Day. Yes. Now the question. What is... So for those of you who haven't seen The Longest Day, amazing World War II movie, D-Day. The night before, the paratroopers went in, and this one guy got himself caught with his parachute tangled up on the church tower in St. Mary Église. And there was a German platoon firefighting in the town square when all these paratroopers started dropping around them. So the paratroopers got slaughtered. And this guy got stuck and deafened by the church bells going off. And he was up there the entire night, couldn't get down. Which apparently was just entirely made up just for the movie. So the actual question, what's the biggest historical misconception, hoax, or lie that you used to believe in that got truth bombed from underneath you? Oh, that one's easy. Yeah, Belton Cooper's book, Death Traps, I think they're called. It was all about the Sherman tank in World War II. Huge controversy saying that just how terrible the Sherman was and how it would burst into flames as soon as a German looked at it. The thing is, Belton Cooper, it wasn't a lie, it wasn't a hoax, it was just a massive misconception, which unfortunately got perpetuated for decades. And it's not until in the last 20 years or so that they've started to disprove this lie, effectively, of how bad the Sherman tank was against Panzer IVs and Panthers and Tigers. The reason why is because the thing you have to understand is Belton Cooper was an ordnance officer. His job was to recover wrecked Shermans. So most of the Shermans that he saw were ones that had been shot up and wrecked and destroyed by the Germans. So his perspective was heavily influenced by that very fact. He didn't really get to see working Shermans advancing and getting the job done in his normal day-to-day work. Instead, he would follow up behind the battle and, all right, that one's been knocked out, we can recover that one's a complete write-off, blah, 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 blah. So there was that. But also you have to understand that the Americans were attacking. And when you're attacking and advancing, you get the opportunity to recover the knocked out tanks that the Germans couldn't do, because any tanks that they lost were very, very soon behind enemy lines, so they couldn't recover them. So what the Germans would do was, if they wouldn't just knock out a Sherman, they would keep shooting it until it burst into flames to completely destroy the chance so that the Americans couldn't recover them and get it back into service and use it against them. So multiple different misconceptions here, all circumstances conspiring to give this one guy the perception, because he wasn't making anything up, he genuinely believed this was the case, genuinely believed that the Sherman was an absolutely terrible tank that just burst into flames the second a German so much as looked at it, which was not the case, but that was his perspective. Unfortunately, that perspective got perpetuated for decades after World War II. And I fell for it because I read his book. And the book, it made perfect sense. But you have to remember the perspective of the person writing it. He wasn't making shit up, but his perspective was horribly, horribly skewed. And I made the mistake of talking about this book on an episode of Mingles with Jingles, without doing the proper research, and a whole bunch of people said, well, actually, Jingles, and rightfully so. So in the next episode of Mingles with Jingles, I published not so much a retraction, but I clarified the situation, explained why I was wrong, explained that I was wrong, and hopefully helping to correct this misconception. I mean, it wasn't a lie in the way that John Steele getting his parachute stuck on the church tower in St Mary Église was a lie, was a Hollywoodization, but it was probably a much, much more dangerous or unhelpful misconception that had been perpetuated for like 50 years after the events actually took place. And still to this day, people think that, it took... the thing, like, it took 5 Shermans to knock out 1 Panther. Well, no, that's bullshit. The Germans would send 1 Panther. The Americans, they're not going to send just 1 Sherman out. They would send a tank platoon out consisting of 4 or 5 Shermans, because that's how they fought. You didn't send 1 Sherman out to operate independently. But the Germans often had to send 1 tank out to support an infantry attack, because that 1 tank is all they had. So 1 Panther against 5 Shermans, yeah, that happened, and sometimes the Panther won. Depends on the circumstances, depends on the terrain, depends on the nature of the fight at the time. But it wasn't that it took 5 Shermans to knock out 1 Panther, it's just they would often have 5 Shermans fighting 1 Panther, because that's how those 2 armies fought each other. So things like that, these are all very unhelpful misconceptions. That they're based in a kernel of truth, but if you look at them with a little bit more of a critical eye, you'll see that actually, yeah, it's bullshit. It's bullshit in the way it's presented, not in the fact of the matter. Anyway, moving on. Good question, though. Very good. From Tank50US. Greetings, Jingles. First, I want to put out a short public service announcement to everyone to be vigilant of their Discords. Change your passwords, keep your credentials up to date. Mine was recently hacked, and I had to create a backup, which is what I'm using now, and my phone keeps going off. My question, have you dabbled at all in the Vault? Yes, I've already covered that one. Oh, and he says, read this only if you have the time. Oh, his Dragonborn Ranger has been cleaving his way through the Forgotten Realms, but now to read this if you only have the time part. The method his Discord was hacked. All right, this is probably worth mentioning, actually. Was by someone posing as a friend and sending him a file. He downloaded the file and ran it, which took over his 2-factor authentication and transferred control to the hacker. Discord's been notified, but it's unlikely he's get his Discord back. So yeah, make sure you do not make this mistake. Don't go downloading files. I suppose it's difficult if it's from somebody posing as somebody that you know. But even then, be suspicious. I mean, why was somebody sending you this file? Did they describe what's in the file? Give you a reason for wanting to open it? Be critical. Otherwise, like Tank50US, you could end up losing your Discord account. And it'd be very difficult to get it back. Minortree93 says, Dear Overlord Jingles, I have heard your request and have searched far and wide, and after 2 months I have returned with a 20-foot pole that can extend to 40 foot if needed. Thus you are forced to explain to your parents what of the following. Furries, avians, scalies, or slimies. Because I was forced to stay up until 5 in the morning, suffering to create the perfect question that Eddie would have approved of. If you do not answer the question, it's only a matter of time before we send the link of the video to your mother. So, I have to explain what are these things to my mother. I only know what one of them are, the furries, but I can probably guess as to what the other 3 are. Wow. Avians, scalies, or slimies. I'm guessing they're furry related, just slightly more specific. I suppose I would have to explain furries and just bet on the fact that my mother is extremely hard of hearing and would probably just nod and smile and pretend that she understood what I was saying. So that's my answer. Bearcat Racing. Jingles, this is a friendly reminder. You forgot the floof tax. Oh, I did, didn't I? I forgot to pay the floof tax in the last video, so I now must pay double. Okay, right, yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. Double floof tax coming up in this video. Obviously not here in the monthly Q&A, but as this goes up as an episode of Mingles with Jingles tomorrow, I will now be paying the floof tax. He says, thanks, Jingles. You're welcome. Thank you for the reminder. La French Baguette says, Jingles, I have a quick question regarding Cold Waters. Is there any chance it might return, with or without mods to the channel? I greatly enjoyed you playing and talking about your experience with other navies and would love to see more of it. I'm never going to say no. Cold Waters is a great game. Much better than the next game that I can't remember the name of the developers, but they did another one. World War II based surface combat, mostly. Wasn't great. Cold Waters itself, however, or am I thinking of... No, got it wrong. I was thinking about the people that did Atlantic Fleet. They did a slightly more ambitious game, but was nowhere near as good. But yes, Cold Waters, great game. My problem with Cold Waters was there's only so many times you can talk around dodging torpedoes. You know, the gameplay was a little repetitive. However, I could make it interesting, but in the same way that, what was his name? Jive Turkey. Because he was a submarine sonar officer. Well, not an officer, sonar chief. So you could watch his videos and just be entertained endlessly by, because he knew what he was talking about, because this is the shit that he did for 20 years during the Cold War, and the stories that he would tell were what made his videos, as well as his knowledge of what was actually going on, were what made his videos interesting. Now, I didn't have the direct knowledge because I wasn't a submariner, but I was what submariners refer to as targets. So I had some perspective on it, and also I could tell, you know, stories. But eventually you run out of the stories. But so, I mean, I may return to Cold Waters because it is a great game. And I'd probably have to play it without some mods just to make the gameplay experience a bit different from what you've already seen. But I don't have any plans to do it just now. Next question from Beatsteaks 1989. Morning Jingles, which game was responsible for your worst gaming experience? The reason doesn't matter, and what was or were the reasons for this terrible experience? Oh, that's easy. Fallout 76, for reasons that I'm pretty sure you're all aware. I mean, there have been a couple of candidates for that title, but absolutely Fallout 76. That the entire experience of playing that game for the first time, a couple of days after launch, was just, well, I'm sure you're all familiar with the Fallout 76 dumpster fire. Just nothing worked, everything was broken. All of the stuff that people liked about Bethesda games, that allowed them to overlook the many bugs that Bethesda games were riddled with. For some bizarre fucking reason, Bethesda thought, yeah, all of that stuff, we'll take that out and just leave the bugs. and that'll be our new game. And that was Fallout 76. It was an absolute dumpster fire from start to finish. It's taken them more than a year to get it into a playable state. Don't pre-order games, kids. Although I know some people are talking about Starfield. You've been pre-ordering. I'm waiting until the 6th when it comes out. And another game that I'm looking forward to playing. I'm cautiously optimistic about. But there's just too many good games for me to play at the moment. For me to... It's really, really hard to find something to devote time to. I mean, I could name other games that were terrible gaming experiences. I've had terrible gaming experiences in any wargaming title. Although for all kinds of different reasons, but definitely Fallout 76 is absolutely the worst thing I have ever played, and the most frustrating and teeth-grindingly painful experience I've had playing anything, which is pretty impressive for a AAA title. Good job, Bethesda. Let's hope, you know, you're doing a better job with Starfield. Although, judging by the early access review, because I was, again, very suspicious of Starfield when I realised that there were no... they had an embargo on reviews, so all those people that had review copies 2 weeks in advance, they weren't allowed to talk about them until after the game went into early access. Early access probably isn't the right word. Pre-order early access. So very, very suspicious. But generally, the reviews I've been looking at are fairly positive. So yeah, hopefully Starfield's going to be a decent experience. I'm sure it will be. I mean, Bethesda aren't going to make this. Well, you'd hope that Bethesda weren't going to make the same mistake twice, and it looks like they haven't. But anyway, yes, moving on. Next question. The Iron Olympian. The Imperium of Man has successfully reintegrated your world, and while your gnomely stature caused confusion, they have deemed you a full human being. Your legendary wit and genius intellect, oh, you ass-kisser, has somehow reached the ears of certain higher-ups, and now they ask for your services. The Imperium shall use their arcane technomagics to help revive and replicate the mind of two mighty individuals of your choosing, one to aid the Imperial Guard, and one for the Imperial Navy. Whom do you choose to aid, or utterly inconvenience these factions, and why? Be warned, they may be lenient, but obviously absurd choices could be met with consequences from holy terror. Oh, God. So I have to think of two persons from history to be revived to serve the Warhammer 40k Imperial Guard and the Warhammer 40k Imperial Navy. Wow. This is one of those questions where you really need some time to think about it. And you're not giving me any time to think about it. Well, I will have a sip of my coffee and I will cogitate on that one. Because this could go either way. Oh, that's good coffee. Right. So, obviously I was in the Navy, so I'm going to want to favour the Imperial Navy. And while you might think, well, he's going to screw over the Imperial Guard by picking somebody utterly incompetent. But while the Navy and the Army do have their differences, we are united by a deep and abiding contempt for the Royal Air Force. Unfortunately, there isn't really an Air Force in 40k. So I guess I'm going to have to screw one of these two sides over. And let's face it, it isn't going to be the Navy. So I would ask for Lord Admiral Horatio Nelson, Britain's greatest, well, arguably greatest, certainly most famous naval commander. Actually, no, scrub that. Nelson's the obvious choice, but he was from the age of sail. He wouldn't understand the first thing about commanding Imperial cruisers. I think I'm going to go for Admiral B.C. Cunningham, the commander of the Mediterranean Fleet in World War II, because he would at least understand the basics. And let's face it, you don't have to understand how the ships work in order to command them. Having some kind of engineering knowledge is at least useful, but not necessary. You're more talking about strategy. And Cunningham was a genius, not as widely known as Nelson, but in the more technological age, I feel that he would be the better choice for the Imperial Navy. Now, for the Imperial Guard, because there's a whole bunch of historical generals that you could choose from to aid the Imperial Guard. But I think I'm going to go for Viscount the Lord Slim. Bill Slim. I keep going on about this guy because not enough people know about him. Everybody knows about Montgomery, British Field Marshal in World War II. Should never have been promoted to Field Marshal because that was a massive political mistake by Churchill, caving into Monty's ego and promoting him to Field Marshal, because it meant that Monty then outranked his boss, Eisenhower, which was just stupid. But he was not the only Field Marshal that Britain had in World War II. The other one, far less well known and arguably, well, there's no arguably about it, absolutely more effective, was Bill Slim, the commander of the Indian Army. Fought out in Burma and India and took a completely defeated and demoralised fighting force, the Indian Army, who had fought a losing retreat over thousands of miles of jungle all the way back to India, trained the shit out of them, taught them not to rely on roads, taught them that just because you were surrounded didn't mean you were defeated, and taught them to fight surrounded and win, and took that defeated army and basically kicked the shit out of the Japanese with it from India all the way back up to Burma, and ended up becoming the Governor General of Australia after the war, and managed the extremely unlikely achievement of becoming a British Governor General of Australia who was loved by the Australians. So, because he was just such an amazing bloke. So yeah, I would say give the Imperial Guard the Viscount Lord Slim, because he actually gave a shit about his troops, which was being extremely unusual in the Imperial Guard and the Imperium of Man in Warhammer 40k. So that could only be a good thing. Oh, there's a couple of very, I don't want to say repetitive. These kind of questions keep coming up. This is from Silent Penguin 6. Hey Jingles, you're going to reintroduce story time with Jingles again. I really enjoyed learning about commanders and generals of World War II that I had no idea about before. Oh, like the Viscount Lord Slim. Always made the end of the videos just a bit more worthwhile for watching. I'd like to see it again. Yes, I keep saying I'm going to do this and I keep forgetting, but thank you for continuing to remind me. This is definitely something that I should do, because it was absolutely one of the most popular parts of Mingles with Jingles. So I will continue to attempt to remember to do this in future videos. And we're going to get one in this video, because the very next question was from Zoe. Morning Jingles, do you have any legendary stories that you or others got up to while on shore leave? Okay. The first one that leaps to mind, because it is the most legendary, was when we were in Toulon in France. I was on board HMS Newcastle, Type 42 destroyer. We were doing ops in the Mediterranean. I can't remember exactly what we were doing. And we had one night's leave in Toulon. We literally just stopped there to take on fuel and stores. But leave was granted. And it's what was known as suicide leave. because leave expired at 7 the following morning, and the ship was sailing at 8. So basically the penalties for being late were doubled if the ship was under sailing orders. So my mess deck, 2Q Port mess deck, the Supply and Secretariat mess, full of writers, stewards and stores assistants, they decided... Oh, and I didn't get to go ashore. I was duty that day. I drew the short straw. So I had to get in my number 1 uniform and go and stand on the gate of the dockyard. Didn't speak any French. my purpose in being there was basically I had a list of the ship's souls on board, and anybody that went out the gate, I checked their name off, and I had to make sure that everybody was back in through the gate to ensure that we weren't leaving without certain members of the ship's company. So I had to stand on that gate the entire night. Like from 10 o'clock at night, I took over. So I already had a list from the guy I took over from of everybody who'd gone ashore. And I was there from 10 o'clock at night until the last person came back on board. So maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe 7 o'clock in the morning. Depends when the last person comes back on board. So my own messmates decided... Toulon sucks. It doesn't, by the way. It's a fantastic town and a great run ashore. But they decided they were going to go to Marseille. Now, I don't know if you've actually looked at the map, but the geographics are, like Toulon, Nice, Turin, Milan, Belgrade, Azerbaijan, Marseille. Right? It's not actually that far down the coast, but it's a fair old distance from Toulon. So, and Marseille is where the French Foreign Legion recruit. It's a rough town. That's where they decided they were going to go for their run ashore rather than just staying in Toulon. So there were all kinds of photographs that came back from this legendary run ashore of theirs. All of them stripped naked in the fountain in the central roundabout of the main road in the town centre of Marseille, stark naked, having a party with the traffic all around them, everybody beeping their horn, very upset French policemen. How they never got arrested, I don't know. They went to casinos, other places I probably shouldn't be talking about on an episode of Mingles with Jingles. They had a good night. It was a run ashore of legendary proportions. But the thing is, I was still on the gate in Toulon, and I couldn't go back to the ship until the last member of the ship's company came on board, or got back. And leave expired at 7 with the ship sailing at 8. 2 minutes to 7 in the morning, this taxi rolls up from Marseille with my mess in the back of the taxi. Now remember, I can't go back to the ship until they've come back through the gate, but the ship is 2 miles away at the other end of the dockyard, and I'm on foot. And instead of saying, "Hey, there you are, hop in the taxi," and because then I could have headed back to the ship because they were the last ones back. No, that would have been... Instead, they all flipped me the finger and laughed at me. The utter bastards, as they got back on board just in time, and I had to run the 2 miles through the dockyard. And by the time I actually got to the jetty, sweating like a PTI on a spelling test, they were already starting to take the gangway away, with the executive officer standing there yelling at me, "Where the hell are you? You're late." I mean, it wasn't my fault. Fortunately, I didn't get in the shit for being late back on board. It wasn't my fault. My orders was to stay on the gate until the last member of the ship's company came on back. The last member of the ship's company being members of my own mess who stitched me up good and proper after they had a fantastic night out in Marseille, of all places, while I was stuck on the gate all night waiting for them to get back. And then they didn't even have the decency to give me a lift back to the ship, because not giving me a lift back to the ship was the funnier option. Because that's just what you do in the Navy. So anyway, yeah. So there you go. The guy called Dave. Jingles, while on deployment, which port were you most looking forward to arriving at? Oh, that's a good one. That would have to be a place that I had never been to before, was probably never going to get a chance to visit again. Although there were certain ports that no matter how many times you went there, they were always amazing. Amsterdam in the Netherlands, particularly good example. Amsterdam was, and hopefully still is, an amazing run ashore. We'd been to Dubai a number of times. Obviously, my very first deployment was the first Gulf War, and I joined the ship in Dubai. Actually, that's not true. Joined it in Jebel Ali, which nowadays is a huge, luxurious holiday destination, massive hotels, shopping malls. Back then, it was a container port with one seaman's mission that sold the best chicken curry in the world. But you could, when the ships were docked in Dubai, they would lay on buses to take, not, so when the ships were docked in Jebel Ali, they would lay on buses to take the ship's company ashore into Dubai. And Dubai was great, even then, it was not the place it is today. There were no massive skyscrapers. There were a couple of hotels, which were the only places you could have a drink, because, Muslim country. But it was still great. So we always loved going back to Dubai. Amsterdam was always fantastic. Haifa in Israel was always good, which was very surprising. I don't know why it was surprising, but it was a place I'd never heard of. It's where the US 3rd Fleet is based, which is the fleet that patrols the Mediterranean and the Arabian Gulf. And that, Haifa itself was good, but the fact that the US 3rd Fleet was based there was what made Haifa so good, because you had the USO Club in Haifa itself, and then the ships that were docked on the jetty in the actual dockyard were constantly laying on these massive barbecues, and each ship had their own rock band, so they would have a battle of the bands on the jetty. It was just amazing music, food, everything, and they would always invite us over because we had beer and they didn't. So we would supply the beer, they would supply the steaks, the barbecue, and the music, and it was just amazing. Although there was the one, we always have to ruin it though. There was this one incident. What was his name? Was a radio operator, went by the name of Mick Baxendale, and he was one of the funniest people I'd ever met. But he had no sense of boundaries, which was one of the things that made him as funny as he was. So we were allowed to use the USO Club in Haifa because the Americans were very, very generous. And we were allowed to use it for exactly one night, and then we got banned, and it was all because of Mick Baxendale. So I'm trying to remember the exact joke. And the joke itself doesn't even make sense, but everybody was drunk, so, Oh, that was it. He said, right, you Americans think that you know everything about everything, but I bet you can't even name 2 states that start with PH. So, of course, all these American sailors are like, yeah, we'll take that bet. Philadelphia. I'm not even sure if Philadelphia is a state or a city, but it doesn't matter. Like I said, I'm pretty sure the joke doesn't actually make a huge bunch of sense, but when you're drunk, you'll go for it anyway. And Mick would say, right, that's one, name another. And they're stumped because there are no states that start with PH. So Mick says, they say, well, there aren't any others here. There is Pearl Harbor. To which they would all reply, Pearl Harbor isn't a state. You say, it was in 1941. It was a right old state in 1941. At which point, he was invited to leave the USA Club through the window. Which kicked off a massive riot. And funnily enough, we were no longer welcome at the USO Club, and Mick had to pay for the window. So you're getting all of these stories. What's going on? Oh, hang on, I'm getting a ping. What's going on? Oh, yeah. Grumps, of course, was in the US Navy, and he's just DM'd me. Yeah, that sounds about right. Anyway, how are we doing for time? Oh, not too bad. Let's continue cracking on. Right. Windows 10 Sound says, hey, Jingles, what's your opinion on World of Warships Legends? Do you think it's on par with the main game? I couldn't say. I had World of Warships Legends. I've even done a video on World of Warships Legends because I like the way that they dealt with the commanders, which I thought was better than in the PC version of World of Warships. But obviously World of Warships Legends is the console version, and I have a console, I just never use it anymore. So when I had my PlayStation 4 Pro, I've still got it, but it's just not plugged in or connected, and it's in storage. So I did dabble in World of Warships Legends, but then I thought, well, I've got World of Warships on PC, why do I need to play it on console as well? Which is a fair question, but they're not really the same game. They do play very differently. So there is a reason why you might wish to continue playing World of Warships on console if you have the PC version. A particularly good reason was that for a very, very long time they didn't have aircraft carriers. So, but yeah, I stopped playing it because I had it on PC, and then I lost. Once I'd finished Red Dead Redemption 2, I only really used the PlayStation as a sort of media player to play Blu-rays and DVDs and stream Netflix and stuff. And now I don't even need it for that, so it's in storage. So I'm unlikely ever to go back to World of Warships Legends. But I do think it's not bad. There are things that it does better than World of Warships, and there are things that it doesn't do better than World of Warships. But I did like the way they, when they introduced the commanders, I thought they did it in a much better way than World of Warships were doing at the time. Although World of Warships has since revamped the commanders for better or worse. But I no longer am current with Legends, so I can't really comment. I don't really know what the state of that game is at the moment. Hello, dear mighty overlord, says the Steel Drummer. Quick question. We all know the Spitfire is your favourite prop plane. Yeah. Hawker Fury, though. But anyway, yeah, we'll say Spitfire. But I've been wondering for a while now, what's your favourite military jet aircraft? You can really choose anything from World War II until now. Thanks for the insight. I'd have to go with the F-4 Phantom. Despite all the shit it got during Vietnam for not having a gun, because it didn't. And the problems with... Because they made this big deal about the F-4 Phantom, which was, I think, the first proper third-generation jet fighter, with a massively powerful engine. I mean, it was this huge brick of an aircraft that could do twice the speed of... faster than twice the speed of sound, thanks to these two huge engines. It had a massively powerful radar, because it was designed as an interceptor. Primarily for the US Navy, but I can't remember his name. Kissinger, was it? Whoever the Secretary of State for Defense was at the time. I'm sure it'll pop into my head. Insisted that the Navy and the Air Force use the same aircraft to save money. So the Air Force didn't want the Phantom, but they soon realised actually this is really, really good. But it was designed as an interceptor, as a naval interceptor, so it didn't need a gun because its purpose was to carry missiles and shoot down bombers at long range. And then Vietnam happened. And the rules of engagement stated that you had to positively identify the target, most of which were going to be MiG-15s, MiG-17s, and then later MiG-21s. And you couldn't positively identify them until they were at dogfighting range, at which point a gun would have been useful, but they weren't equipped with them. And a lot was made about the horrible effectiveness of because everybody thought, oh, that's it, missiles. You don't need guns anymore. Actually, yeah, the missiles weren't very good. Well, actually, the missiles weren't that bad. Stuff like the AIM-9 Sparrow, it was just... You needed to be trained to use them properly, and that hadn't really happened. And so the kill ratio was terrible. But it wasn't really a fault of the aircraft. And it was such a flexible aircraft. Eventually, it turned into a pretty good fighter, providing, you didn't try to get into turning fights with MiG-15s. It was always a great interceptor, and it turned out to be a great strike aircraft as well, because it could carry more bombs than a B-17 because it was so massively powerful. Great aircraft, and the Royal Navy F-4 Phantoms had the distinction of being the most powerful Phantoms in the world, because they didn't use... I can't remember the name of the American engine. Very, very good American engines, but the Rolls-Royce engines that we used were even more powerful. So they were the loudest, the noisiest, the dirtiest, because you could see one of these things coming just by the jet trail. But the most powerful Phantoms in the world. And they served a whole bunch of NATO forces for a very long time. So I'd have to go with the F-4 Phantom. People are going, oh, Hawker Fury. Can't recall you mentioning that before. Yeah, the Hawker Fury was, I think, the first prop-driven aircraft to shoot down a jet. Happened in the Korean War. Can't remember his name. Royal Navy Lieutenant Commander. Shot down a MiG-15 in the Hawker Fury. I don't know if the Hawker Fury was the fastest prop aircraft in the world, but it was absolutely going to be in the top 2 or 3. It still couldn't outperform a jet, but under the right circumstances, you could. I mean, it wasn't the only prop aircraft to shoot a jet down. I think the US Air Force managed it with a P-51 Mustang, but I think the Hawker Fury was the first. It was a great aircraft. It took piston-engined aircraft about as far as they could go, performance-wise, in the jet age. Nice simple question here from Catster. Morning, Jingles. Just a simple one. What kind of music do you listen to? I listen to all sorts of stuff. There aren't many genres of music that I would say, yeah, I don't listen to any of that rubbish, because even a genre of music like hip-hop, for example, that I'm not a great fan of, there are certain examples of hip-hop music that are objectively great and subjectively banging tunes as well. So I listen to pretty much everything. But I'm definitely more into rock. If you were to look at my music collection, it's like 90% AC/DC, Queen. You know, obviously I was born in the 70s and I started actually listening to music in the 80s. So you're going to see stuff, rock music from the 80s basically, and less so, but also including music from the 90s. But I'm basically, I wouldn't go so far as to call myself a metalhead, but I just love rock. But I will listen to anything, as if it's people that don't use an auto tune, write their own stuff, play their own music. I'm prepared to give them a chance, regardless of the genre of music. That's basically the only real distinction. People that write their own music, play their own instruments, I'll give them a listen because they've earned it. But there are, that's just a general rule. I pretty much listen to just about everything. There's very little times that I'll say, no, I'm not even going to listen to that because I don't like that genre. I'll give everything a chance. Next question from Etchy is cool. Oh, glorious Overlord Jingles. Do you have plans on doing ship reviews like from the old World of Tanks days? That's not a bad idea. Actually, I don't know if you watched The Sailing Robin. He's French. I'm not sure. I know he works for Wargaming in some capacity, but I don't know if it's World of Warships or World of Warships Legends. Possibly Legends. But his videos are astounding because he live streams. And he has, every now and then, the most amazing battles in the most unlikely of circumstances, doing impossible things in the most unlikely ships. And they go up in very, very occasional videos on YouTube. Like, there'll be a 3-month gap between each video he uploads, but the ones that he does upload are always worth watching. And he will do an extensive review of the ship before the battle. My problem is his video editing skills are far better than mine. And anything that I do would really kind of pale into insignificance compared. But then again, I mean, hardly anybody watches his videos. More people need to watch them and subscribe to them because his stuff is really, really good. So it's not like anybody's going to be comparing his stuff to mine, because hardly anybody watches him. You really do need to subscribe to The Sailing Robin, even if he doesn't put a video up every day. The videos that he does do are incredible, and his back catalogue is pretty good. But then again, I mean, I do kind of... It's not that I do specific dedicated ship reviews, but I do talk about the pros and cons of every ship that is being played in every World of Warships. Well, not every, but most World of Warships videos. Like, it's traditional at the start of the video that I do give you the pros and cons of the ship. So I do kind of review the ship in every video that I do. Plus, I'm not sure quite how much mileage, because that's what Sailing Robin does as well. The first 3 or 4 minutes of the video is just him going through the stats of the ship, and then he plays it. And I kind of do that as well. So I'm not quite sure what the mileage would be in just doing a ship review, because people want to see it being played as well. And that is basically what I do anyway. Next question, Bad Karma 22. Greetings, Lord Jingles, from your Canadian minds. No question, just wanted to say I appreciate your contact. Well, thank you. I appreciate your comment or question or whatever. I suppose it's a comment since you didn't actually ask a question. Next question from PR. Hello, Jingles. Greetings from Finland. I've been thoroughly enjoying your Aliens Dark Descent playthrough. You mentioned having your eyes on Starfield, and reviews are more or less positive, yeah. Bethesda has seemed to be more or less truthful in marketing. The amount of bugs also seems low, at least, considering it's a Bethesda game. Are you considering to get the game when it launches on Wednesday, and perhaps even blessing your minions with a playthrough of the game? To clarify, I have not pre-ordered the game, good man. I'm doing the same thing as you and wait until the 6th. Oh, and I want to mention that according to your recommendation, I've been listening to the Dresden Files from Audible. Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, the Chicago's only wizard who's in the phone book. Yeah, and I've been thoroughly enjoying it. I believe I'm starting book 5 next. Oh. So I can't say anything, or it's going to be a massive spoiler. But yeah, enjoy. Amazing book recommendations, by the way. Yeah, Aliens Dark Descent. I've been loving that game. Although I do have to say, how can I put this without giving massive spoilers? I suspect most people who've got the game as a result of watching me playing it already know what's coming. The ending could have been improved upon. It's a bit of a Mass Effect 3 thing. I mean, it's not like choose the colour of your ending in the way that Mass Effect 3 ends, but they could have done something cool and innovative and original, or they could have just done something entirely predictable with the ending. and they went for entirely predictable, which was kind of disappointing. But still a great game, and I have been absolutely loving every minute of it. Even it's a kind of game where I don't mind getting my ass kicked because I learned something from it. You know, if you get your ass whooped in Aliens Dark Descent, it's always your own fault, right? You can't blame the game. It's not unfair. There's always a way out of whatever situation you manage to dig yourself into, if you're paying attention. And if you're not, well, that's on you. So I think, where am I at the moment? We've just gotten to, oh yeah, the Montero. Oh my God, that place is a fucking nightmare. But again, I mean, I got my ass handed to me the first time I went in, thinking it was going to be a quick in and out, because it's an M-class star freighter. I know the layout of these things. They're tiny inside. They're just 4 massive engines with a tiny crew and engineering pod. This will be easy. Not. And I had completely the wrong lineup, the wrong equipment, and I had to bug out before I got the squad wiped out. So in the next video, I'll be going in with a slightly more sensible squad layout. And yes, I will unlock the flamethrowers because they're amazing in tight quarters, like on board the Montero. But again, you know, I was getting my ass kicked. I've got to try to plug on and probably gotten the entire squad killed. That would have all been my fault. Again, the game it's never unfair. It loves to screw you over. It will get you used to doing things a certain way and then remove the ability to do that and ask you to deal with it. And I love that about the game. But it's always at least fair. Any shit that you get yourself into is always your own fault. So I love making those videos as well. I absolutely love making the Aliens Dark Descent videos. I'm going to be so gutted when that video series ends. And I've actually played through it twice now, incorporating lessons that I learned the first time around, and it's still just as hard. It doesn't get easier. Anyway, let's have a look at one more question, and then I'm going to have to knock this one on the head. So red shirt number 3. Dear Mighty Overlord Jingles, who is your favourite Star Trek captain? That's a good question. So who are our choices? So you've got Kirk, obviously, although technically, what's his name? Pike, his predecessor. And then, of course, you've got Picard, who's always going to be a favourite. And then you've got Commander Sisko from Deep Space Nine, who technically wasn't a captain, but did get promoted to captain, so that counts. Janeway from Voyager, who I despised, so it's never going to be her. Not really because of the character, but because of the way the actress treated every other woman on the set as a threat. Particularly, who's her name? Jerry Ryan, who played 7 and 9, suffered on that show thanks to, can't remember the name of the actress who played Janeway, so, you know, screw Janeway. And then you got Captain Archer from Star Trek Enterprise. And I never really watched Star Trek Enterprise, but I do like Scott Bakula, the actor who played him. He's usually pretty good in everything. And then the others from when Trek really started going downhill, so they can all screw themselves as well. So the only real choices, I suppose, are going to be Picard, Sisko, or Kirk. I'm going to have to go with Sisko. It's probably going to be a controversial choice, but Star Trek Deep Space Nine was my favourite Star Trek series. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was just the time, like the mid-80s, early 90s. Mid-80s? Actually, early 90s, mid-90s, because I was in the Navy. Yes, it would have been mid-90s. And I had the entire collection of Star Trek Deep Space Nine on VHS tape. And I loved all of the characters. So probably for no other reason that was kind of my Star Trek, I'm going to have to go with Benjamin Sisko, played by Avery Brooks, who was really, really good. The entire cast were amazing. So, yeah, Sisko, Deep Space Nine. And that's going to have to be it for this week's episode of, well, Mingles with Jingles and the Salt Mines Discord server Q&A. Thank you to everybody who turned up to watch. Apologies to everybody whose question didn't get asked. I think I only got through about half of them. But you never know your luck. Get here early enough next time, get the question in, and your question will get answered. So, again, thank you to everybody who turned up. If you're watching this as an episode of Mingles with Jingles on Monday, hope you enjoyed the episode. Hope you found it entertaining. Hope it's given you something to think about and maybe talk about in the comments. Thank you to everybody who turned up for the live Q&A. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.